Hello, my name is Mateo Dalton. I'm 30 years old, living in Denver and working as a civil engineer. People say I'm the reliable type, always punctual, true to my word, and meticulous about details. My job isn't just about constructing buildings, it's about building trust with colleagues and clients. I take pride in that, but to be honest, my life isn't as neat and orderly as the straight lines on my technical drawings. It's far messier, especially since the day my dad called. I still remember that afternoon. The Denver air was chilly with pale golden sunlight streaming through my office window. I had just finished designing an overpass and was double-checking the numbers when my phone buzzed. The screen showed Dad. He rarely calls during work hours, so I had a bad feeling. I picked up and his voice was low but urgent, like he was holding something back. "Mateo, come home for dinner tonight. Your mom and I have something important to tell you." I pressed for details, but he just said, "Just come home and I'll explain." I hung up, feeling uneasy. My parents, Curtis and Sylvia Dalton, retired a few years ago and live in a small house in the Denver suburbs. They're not the type to make a fuss, so when Dad said something important, I knew it wasn't trivial. I texted Hazel, my fiancée, to let her know I'd stop by my parents' place before coming home. She replied instantly with a short message. "Everything okay?" I wanted to say probably fine, but my fingers paused over the keyboard. I wasn't sure. Speaking of Hazel, she's the light of my life. We met 3 years ago at a fundraiser for underprivileged kids at a community center. I was standing in a corner holding a glass of orange juice, feeling out of place in the noisy crowd. Then I saw her, Hazel Walker, an elementary school teacher, playing with a group of kids, her smile as bright as sunshine. She has wavy brown hair, sparkling eyes, and a gentle voice that made me forget where I was. I mustered all my courage to talk to her, and from that moment, we've been inseparable. 3 years later, Hazel and I are engaged. We moved into a small rented house in the Denver suburbs. It's not luxurious, but Hazel made it a home. She hung up her own paintings, placed a few potted plants in the corners, and always keeps the kitchen smelling of freshly baked cookies. Hazel is patient and knows how to calm me when I get frustrated. I, on the other hand, can be impulsive, quick to anger when things don't go as planned. But she's always there, reminding me to take a deep breath, and somehow I find my calm again. That evening, I drove to my parents' house, my heart heavy. The familiar suburban road was lined with oak trees standing silently under the sunset. Their house came into view, small, simple, with a white wooden fence faded by time. I took a deep breath and walked in. The smell of grilled meat wafted from the kitchen where Mom was setting the table, and Dad was in his armchair holding a newspaper but staring at the TV. "You're here," Mom said, her voice cheerful but her eyes betraying a hint of tension. I hugged her, clapped Dad on the shoulder, and sat down at the table. The atmosphere was quieter than usual, with only the clinking of plates breaking the silence. I tried making small talk, asking about Mom's vegetable garden or the football games Dad loves, but their responses were curt. Finally, after the main course, Dad cleared his throat and set down his chopsticks. "Mateo, we need to talk." He looked at me, his gaze stern. "This house, it's gone." I froze, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. "Gone? What do you mean?" I asked, my voice faltering. Mom spoke up, her voice trembling. "We sold the house to pay off Mason's debts." Mason, my younger brother. He's 26, studied economics at a nearby university, but dropped out in his 3rd year, claiming school taught him nothing. Since then, he's thrown himself into risky ventures, cryptocurrency, derivatives, you name it. He borrowed money left and right, promising to get rich quick, but every time he lost it all. I warned my parents not to indulge him, but they always defended him. "He's young, let him try," they said. And now, they'd sold the house I grew up in, filled with memories, just to bail Mason out of his debts. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to suppress my anger. "Why didn't you tell me first?" I asked, my voice shaking. Dad met my gaze, unwavering. "We didn't want to burden you, but now we need a place to stay." We want to move in with you. My heart stopped. Our house, the tiny rented place Hazel and I live in, how could it fit 4 people? I wanted to yell, to ask why they let Mason ruin everything, why I had to bear the consequences. But seeing Mom's eyes red and weary, I couldn't say a word. From a young age, my parents taught me to be filial, that as the eldest son, I had to take care of the family. I've done that. Since starting my job as an engineer, I've sent them money every month, given them a supplementary credit card, even opened a joint account for their expenses. But now, they wanted more. I need time to think, I said, my voice hoarse. Dad nodded, but Mom grabbed my hand, her voice almost pleading. Mateo, you're the eldest son. You can't say no to us. Her words cut like a knife, piercing my pride. I stood up, said I'd call them later, and left the house in a storm of emotions. On the drive home, I moved slowly, my mind spinning. I was angry at Mason, angry at my parents for letting things spiral this far. But deep down, I felt guilty. They're my parents, the ones who raised me. How could I turn my back on them when they had nowhere else to go? When I got home, Hazel was on the couch, a book in her hands but her eyes on the door waiting for me. The soft yellow lamplight illuminated her face, and for a moment my heart eased. I told her everything, each word like salt in a wound. Hazel listened, her eyes flickering with worry. She knew our house was small, barely enough for 2, and adding 2 more people would upend everything. But she didn't say anything, just held my hand and asked gently, "What do you think?" I sighed, my head bowed. I don't want them to move in. But they're my parents, Hazel. I can't leave them on the street. She nodded, not objecting, though I saw the unease in her eyes. Hazel is always like that, patient, gentle, even when she's worried. If you think it's the right thing, I'll support you, she said, her voice soft but firm. The next morning, I sat at the dining table, a cold cup of coffee in front of me. Hazel had made it for me, but she didn't ask anything else, just quietly got ready for work. I looked at her, my heart heavy. I knew this decision could disrupt our lives, but I didn't see another choice. I picked up the phone and called Dad. "Okay, you and Mom can move in, but just temporarily until you find a new place." Dad's voice lightened, and I heard Mom in the background saying something about a son's duty. I hung up, telling myself everything would be fine. It's only temporary. The day my parents moved in, our small rented house felt like it was being squeezed tight. The place was barely big enough for 2, a modest bedroom, a humble living room, and a kitchen corner that Hazel always kept tidy. Now, the living room had become my parents' makeshift bedroom. A foldable mattress was pushed against the wall next to the old sofa, surrounded by suitcases and bags. Every time I walked through, I had to step carefully to avoid tripping over the cardboard boxes my mom brought, filled with things she insisted she couldn't part with. The kitchen was perpetually cluttered. Dishes piled up, dishcloths scattered, and Mom's old spice jars crowded alongside Hazel's neatly arranged ones. Seeing it all, my heart sank as if our home was being invaded. Privacy, the most precious thing Hazel and I had, was nearly gone. Before every evening after work, we'd sit on the sofa, Hazel leaning on my shoulder, talking about her students or our little plans for the future. Now that sofa was my parents' territory. My mom, Sylvia, was always there watching TV or flipping through old magazines. From the very first days, Mom started nitpicking. Everything Hazel did was under scrutiny. Every morning, Mom was up early, standing in the kitchen with a cup of tea, watching Hazel like a judge. "Hazel, you always sleep in this late?" she'd say, her tone light but laced with judgment, when Hazel emerged from our room at 7, only half an hour later than Mom. Hazel would force a smile, explaining she'd been up late preparing lessons, but Mom would just hum and turn away. Mealtimes were even worse. Hazel made my favorite grilled ribs, but Mom stood nearby, shaking her head. "This is too bland, no flavor at all," she remarked. I saw Hazel's hand tremble slightly as she set the plate down, but she stayed silent. Every meal brought more criticism. "Hazel, how do you clean the house when the floor's still this dirty?" Mom would say, even though I knew Hazel had polished it to a shine. Or worse, she'd hint, "Mateo deserves a more capable woman, someone who knows how to take care of a family." Those words cut me like a knife. I wanted to snap back to tell Mom that Hazel was the most wonderful person I'd ever met, but every time I opened my mouth, I saw her eyes. The eyes of a woman who'd sacrificed her whole life to raise me. So I swallowed my words, telling myself she was just stressed by their situation. Dad was quieter, but that didn't mean he was blameless. He'd sit silently at the table, grimacing when he tasted Hazel's cooking. "This dish lacks nutrition, Hazel," he'd say, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "Your mom made it so much better." Hazel would nod, a strained smile on her lips, but I saw her clench her hands under the table as if holding back a storm. One time I caught her standing alone in the kitchen, staring at the pile of dishes Mom left behind, her eyes red. I wanted to hug her, to tell her I saw everything, but my throat tightened. All I could do was pat her shoulder and wash the dishes with her in silence, hoping she knew I was trying. Hazel, true to her nature, remained patient. One night in our bedroom, the only place we still had some privacy, she took my hand, her voice soft but resolute. "Your parents probably just need time to adjust, Mateo. I can handle it, don't worry." I looked into her eyes and saw exhaustion mixed with determination. Hazel wasn't one to give up. She started doing more, waking up earlier to clean, cooking dishes Mom liked, even though Mom never offered a single compliment. She hoped her patience would ease the tension in the house, but I knew she was pushing herself too hard. Every forced smile she gave was like a scratch on my heart. I was caught in the middle. I saw the discomfort in Hazel's eyes, heard every barbed comment from Mom. Each time Mom criticized her, I wanted to yell to tell her to stop. But then I'd tell myself this was temporary, that my parents would soon find a new place, that things would go back to normal. Every night, lying next to Hazel, listening to her steady breathing as she slept, a sense of unease grew in me. This house, the home Hazel and I had built, now felt like a cramped cage, trapping us all in unspoken tension. I started to wonder, was letting my parents move in the biggest mistake of my life? I looked at Hazel, the woman I love more than anything, and saw her trying so hard for me, for my family. But I knew if things continued like this, she wouldn't be able to endure it forever. And I, the man who prided himself on discipline and responsibility, felt powerless in the face of my own family. One question kept echoing in my mind. Could things get any worse? In the days that followed, my mother's controlling nature became increasingly apparent. At first, I thought she was just being difficult because she was adjusting to her new circumstances. But soon I realized it wasn't just irritability. She wanted to control everything. One morning I walked into our bedroom and found her standing at Hazel's vanity, the drawer wide open with Hazel's lipsticks and jewelry scattered everywhere. "What are you doing, Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She turned around, completely unapologetic. "I'm just checking if Hazel keeps her things properly. How can a woman be so sloppy and still take care of her husband?" I was stunned, anger flaring in my chest, but I only clenched my fists and told her not to touch Hazel's things again. She huffed and walked away as if I were the one in the wrong. But that wasn't the worst of it. One day, Hazel came home early carrying a stack of student assignments to grade. She sat at the dining table, focused on her work, but my mother appeared, looming behind her like a shadow. "Hazel, what are you doing, burying your face in the table like that?" she asked, her tone dripping with suspicion. Before Hazel could respond, Mom opened Hazel's laptop and started scrolling through the screen. "I just wanted to see if you're actually working or just playing around," she said, as if it were perfectly normal. Hazel sat frozen, her face pale, her hand gripping her pencil so tightly her knuckles turned white. I stood at the kitchen door, witnessing it all, and for the first time I saw Hazel trembling with anger. But she stayed silent, quietly closing her laptop and resuming her work. My mother's criticisms became a monotonous, repetitive tune playing day after day. During dinners, as we sat around the table, she'd make pointed remarks. "Mateo, my son deserves a wife who knows how to manage a household, not someone like this." Her words were like a knife, cutting not just into Hazel but into my heart as well. Hazel began to crumble. At first she forced smiles, trying to brush off the constant critiques, but gradually I noticed the light in her eyes dimming. She spoke less. Her smiles grew rare, and in the moments when it was just the two of us, she'd often sit silently, staring out the window as if hiding something. One night I woke up in the middle of the night, reaching across the bed only to realize Hazel wasn't there. My eyes scanned the room and I saw her small, trembling figure by the window. The sight made my heart clench. Hazel was curled up in a chair, her eyes red, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. "Hazel," I called softly, stepping toward her. She startled, quickly wiping her tears and forcing a smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired," she said, her voice quivering. I hugged her, feeling her body tremble in my arms. For the first time I saw Hazel. The ever-patient, ever-gentle Hazel, truly unable to bear it any longer. My father, Curtis, did nothing to help the situation. Whenever Mom criticized Hazel, he always took her side. "Hazel, you should learn to keep the house properly," he said once when Hazel accidentally spilled some sauce on the table. "Your mother always kept everything spotless. You should take notes." Hazel nodded, a strained smile on her lips, but I saw her bite her lip so hard it bled. Dad's attitude infuriated me, but what hurt more was the sense that Hazel was being isolated. It felt like my entire family was on one side against her. I wanted to protect Hazel, to shout that she didn't deserve this treatment, but my duty to my parents held me back, like an invisible rope tightening around my neck. The atmosphere in the house grew heavier by the day. Every meal turned into a silent battle. Hazel prepared food with utmost care, but Mom always found something to criticize, from the way she chopped vegetables to how she arranged the plates. Dad would grimace and shake his head, as if nothing Hazel did was good enough. I sat at the table, feeling torn in two. Part of me ached for Hazel, wanting to stand up and defend her. The other part was weighed down by my responsibility to my parents. I was powerless, eating in silence, trying to ignore the suffocating tension around us. Meanwhile, Mason, the root of all this chaos, continued living carefree in another city. He didn't care that our parents were staying in my cramped house, or that Hazel and I were bearing the consequences of his actions. Every now and then he'd call, not to check in but to ask for money. "Bro, lend me some cash. I've got a big investment coming up," he'd say, his tone as casual as if he hadn't caused the debts that cost our parents their home. Every time I heard his voice, I wanted to smash the phone. I refused him outright, but the anger inside me didn't fade. Mason was out partying with friends, chasing his reckless schemes, while Hazel and I dealt with the fallout of his irresponsibility. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt like this house was closing in on me. Hazel slept beside me, but I knew her sleep wasn't peaceful. My mother's constant criticisms, my father's disapproval, and Mason's indifference weighed on me like stones on my chest. On a typical morning around 6 o'clock, I woke up early for my usual jog. The Denver air was crisp, the faint dawn light filtering through the oak trees. I ran along the familiar path, letting the rhythm of my steps and breaths push away the heaviness in my mind. I thought about Hazel, how she still tried to smile despite my mother's relentless criticism. I thought about my parents, the responsibility I'd carried since I was young. And I thought about Mason, the irresponsible one living carefree somewhere while Hazel and I paid the price for his mistakes. My heart was a tangled mess, but I told myself today would be a fresh start, that I'd find a way to talk frankly with my parents. When I returned, sweat still beading on my forehead, I opened the door, hoping to see Hazel brewing coffee, greeting me with her gentle smile as always. But the moment I stepped inside, I heard sharp, angry shouting from the bedroom. My mother's voice, cold and furious, rang out like a hammer. Lazy girl. Get up, don't just lie there. My heart pounded as I rushed to the bedroom, and the sight before me made my blood run cold. My mother stood beside the bed, hands on her hips, her face flushed with rage. Hazel was still in bed, eyes barely open, not fully awake. The blankets and sheets were flung aside, scattered on the floor. But what froze me in place was the bucket of ice water in my mother's hands. Before I could react, she hurled the contents onto Hazel. The freezing water splashed everywhere, soaking Hazel's pajamas and pooling on the mattress. Hazel jolted upright, panicked, her wet hair clinging to her face. She hugged herself, trembling, and then broke into sobs, her cries filled with humiliation and pain. I stood there, stunned, as if someone had punched me in the chest. Everything around me blurred, leaving only Hazel's sobs echoing in my head. "What are you doing?" I roared, my voice shaking with fury. My mother turned to me, utterly unrepentant. "She needs to learn to get up on time and be a proper wife," she snapped, as if her actions were perfectly justified. I looked at Hazel, curled up on the bed, her red eyes full of hurt, and something inside me shattered. All the months of holding back, all the times I tried to keep the peace, exploded in that moment. The anger, the pity for Hazel, and the outrage at my mother's outrageous behavior fused into a fire burning in my chest. I was no longer the dutiful son, no longer the one trying to balance everything. All I saw was Hazel, the woman I love who had sacrificed so much, being humiliated in our own home. "Stop it right now," I growled, stepping forward to stand between Hazel and my mother. My voice was firm, without a trace of hesitation. She froze, probably shocked that I dared speak to her like that. "What did you say?" she demanded, her voice rising. I met her gaze, unflinching. "You don't get to treat Hazel like this. Never again." Hazel was still crying, but she grabbed my hand as if seeking some comfort. I felt her trembling fingers, and it only strengthened my resolve. I helped Hazel sit up, pulling her into my arms, trying to shield her from this storm. "Go change, okay?" I whispered, my voice softening but still trembling with anger. Hazel nodded quietly, slipping into the bathroom, leaving me to face my mother. She stood there, her eyes defiant. "You dare yell at me over that girl?" she said, her voice thick with indignation. "I'm only trying to do what's best for you, to make sure you have a decent wife." "Enough, that's enough." I cut her off, my voice icy and sharp. "Hazel is my future wife, and I won't let anyone hurt her, not even you." Those words were like a blade, severing the patience I'd clung to for so long. I no longer saw my mother as someone I had to respect unconditionally. I only saw Hazel, who had endured so much for my sake, and I knew I had to protect her no matter the cost. That moment marked a turning point. I shed the role of the dutiful, patient son I'd carried for years. I was done sacrificing Hazel's happiness to keep the peace. I looked at my mother, my gaze steady, and said clearly, "You've gone too far. I won't let this continue." Her jaw dropped, as if she couldn't believe her ears. But I didn't care. All I knew was that from this moment on, I would stand by Hazel, even if it meant confronting my own family. Hazel emerged from the bathroom, her hair still wet, her eyes red but filled with trust as she looked at me. I took her hand, feeling the faint warmth of her trembling fingers, and I knew I had made the right choice. I pulled Hazel onto the sofa, trying to shield her from the suffocating tension still lingering in the room. My mother stood there, hands on her hips, her eyes blazing as if she wanted to burn us both. "I can't believe you'd yell at me over that girl," she repeated, her voice shrill as if she couldn't fathom what I'd just said. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, but inside the fire of anger still smoldered. "Mom, I've already told you. You don't get to hurt Hazel. Not ever again." She let out a laugh, but it was bitter and laced with mockery. "Hurt? I'm teaching her how to be a wife. You deserve better than this, Mateo. Can't you see? The house is a mess, her cooking is bland. What does she have that's worthy of you?" Each word was like a hammer striking my chest. I looked at Hazel, her head bowed, hands clenched tightly as if trying to stop herself from crying again. The humiliation in her eyes made my heart ache. I couldn't let her endure this any longer. "Enough," I shouted, my voice echoing in the small room. My mother froze, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but it quickly hardened again. I stepped forward, standing tall, meeting her gaze. "Mom, Dad, both of you need to leave. Today." The words came out clear and final, like a decisive cut. I had crossed my limit. What my mother did this morning wasn't just an insult to Hazel, it was a slap to the happiness we'd built together. My mother's jaw dropped, as if she couldn't believe her ears. "This is your house, so it's our house too. I have a right to be here. You dare kick your parents out on the street?" She stepped forward, pointing at my chest, her eyes full of defiance. I heard Hazel gasp, still sitting silently on the sofa, but I knew she was stunned. I wanted to turn to her, to hold her and tell her everything would be okay, but I had to face this moment head on. "This isn't your house," I said, my voice cold but resolute. "This is mine and Hazel's home. Our names are on the lease. Every expense, rent, utilities, is paid by me and Hazel. You and Dad are just temporary guests. And now, I want you to leave." I emphasized each word, leaving no room for her to interrupt. For the first time in my life, I felt no need to apologize, no need to back down. I had done so much for my parents, sent them money every month, given them a credit card, opened a joint account, but they never appreciated it. And now they had gone too far. My father, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. He stood up from his chair, stepping beside Mom, his eyes filled with disappointment. "Mateo, you're an ungrateful son," he said, his voice low but sharp as a knife. "We raised you, sacrificed everything so you could have what you have today. And now you dare kick us out for some woman? You don't know what it means to be a son?" His words were another stab, piercing the years I'd spent trying to fulfill my filial duty. But this time I didn't feel guilty. I only saw Hazel, who had suffered too much because of me, and I knew I couldn't let her be hurt anymore. "I've done everything I could," I replied, my voice trembling, not from fear but from the anger I'd suppressed for too long. "I sent you money, gave you a credit card, let you stay here even though this house isn't big enough. But I won't let Mom hurt Hazel like this. Never." I turned to Hazel, taking her hand and giving it a gentle squeeze as if to say she wasn't alone anymore. Suddenly, my mother lunged toward Hazel so fast I couldn't react in time. She pointed in Hazel's face, screaming, "Who do you think you are? You're nothing but a worthless girl trying to tear my son away from his family." Before I could intervene, she swung her hand, slapping Hazel hard across the cheek. The sharp crack echoed like a hammer in the room. Hazel recoiled, clutching her face, her eyes wide with shock, tears spilling uncontrollably. "Mrs. Sylvia," she stammered, her voice trembling, but my mother didn't stop. She pointed at Hazel, cursing venomously. "You'll never be happy. You'll regret taking my son from me." My heart stopped. Everything around me blurred, leaving only Hazel's sobs and my mother's hateful glare. The anger inside me erupted, uncontainable. "Enough," I roared, my voice booming through the small room, startling even myself. I rushed forward, standing in front of Hazel, pulling her behind me like a shield. "Mom, Dad, get out of our house. Now." My whole body shook with rage. Hazel clung to my shirt, her breathing ragged, and I felt her fear in every grip of her hand. My mother froze, a flicker of shock in her eyes, as if she couldn't believe I'd yelled at her. But she quickly regained her composure, pointing at me, her voice trembling with fury. "You dare defy me? You'll regret this, Mateo. You kick your parents out and you'll face the consequences." She turned to Hazel, her gaze venomous, as if she wanted to devour her. "And you think you've won? You'll never be worthy of my son." I held Hazel's hand tightly, feeling her tremble behind me. "Mom, this is the last time I'm saying it," I said, my voice low but icy, each word carved into the air. "This is mine and Hazel's home. I don't want to argue anymore. Pack your things and leave." My father shook his head, his eyes warning me that I'd betrayed the family. "Do this, and you'll lose everything, Mateo," he said, his voice low but menacing. I didn't respond. I only knew that if I kept giving in, I'd lose Hazel, the most precious thing in my life. I had made my choice. Protecting Hazel and the peace of our small family was more important than any face or filial duty I'd been taught. The family stood in direct confrontation. There was no room for reconciliation, no gentle words to smooth things over. My mother kept shouting, my father stood there with his disappointed gaze, but I didn't back down. For the first time, I said no outright to my parents, regardless of the consequences. I looked at Hazel, seeing her sit in shock, but her eyes still turned to me as if she knew I was doing this for her. I squeezed her hand, feeling the faint warmth of her trembling fingers, and I knew I had done the right thing. "Hey, Hazel, go rest in the bedroom for a bit," I said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. She nodded, standing up quietly, but her eyes met mine with a trust that told me she knew I wouldn't abandon her. As she disappeared behind the bedroom door, I turned to face my parents. "I don't want to argue anymore," I said, my voice low but firm. "Pack your things and leave. If you don't, I'll call the police." My mother laughed, but it was a bitter, mocking sound. "The police? You dare call the police to kick out your own parents? You're truly ungrateful." She stepped toward me as if to slap me, but I stood my ground, unflinching. "Mom, I don't want this to go any further," I said, my voice trembling. Not from fear, but from the anger I'd suppressed for too long. "But I'll do what I have to do to protect Hazel." My father shook his head, his eyes full of disappointment. "You're no longer my son," he said, then turned away as if disowning me. But they didn't leave. My mother plopped down on the sofa, arms crossed, declaring, "I'm not going anywhere. This is my son's house, so it's my house too." My father stood beside her, silent, but his silence seemed to agree with her. I looked at them, feeling as if my heart were being torn in two. Part of me remembered my childhood, my mother hugging me, my father teaching me how to fix a bicycle. But another part saw only Hazel, the woman who had endured so much for me. I had no other choice. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "Hello, I need the police at my house," I said, my voice calm but my heart pounding. I gave the address and briefly explained that my parents refused to leave my rented home despite my request. My mother overheard, her eyes widening with shock and fury. "You're really calling the police?" she snarled, lunging to grab the phone from my hand, but I stepped back, holding it tightly. "Mom, I told you. I don't want this to go further, but you're forcing me to do this." 10 minutes later, a police car pulled up in front of the house. 2 officers walked in, a tall man and a woman with a stern gaze. I explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady. I showed them the lease agreement, proving that Hazel and I were the legal tenants and that we paid all the expenses. My mother interrupted, her voice nearly breaking. "I'm his mother. He can't throw me out like this. I have a right to be here." My father stood by, muttering something about an ungrateful son, but he couldn't provide any evidence to support their claim to stay. The female officer reviewed the lease and nodded to her colleague. "Mr. Dalton, you're the legal tenant," she said clearly. "You have the right to ask anyone to leave if they're not authorized to be here." My mother froze, turning to me, her eyes burning. "You're choosing an outsider over your own parents?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. I didn't answer, only lowered my head, feeling a sharp pain like a blade twisting in my chest. By now, a few neighbors had gathered outside, peering in curiously. I heard their whispers, saw their prying eyes. My mother noticed too, and I saw her face flush, not with anger, but with embarrassment. "What are you looking at?" she snapped, but her voice faltered as if she knew she was losing face. The male officer spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, sir, you need to pack your things and leave today. If you don't, we'll have to escort you out. We don't want this to get more complicated." My mother tried to argue, but my father placed a hand on her shoulder, shaking his head. "Enough, Sylvia," he said, his voice low and weary. "Let's go." They began packing, dragging suitcases and cardboard boxes out of the living room. I stood there, watching my parents leave, my heart torn between grief and relief. Grief because these were my parents, the ones who raised me, but relief because this marked the end of an oppressive chapter. Hazel emerged from the bedroom exhausted, her eyes still red but filled with gratitude as she looked at me. She didn't say anything, just took my hand, and I felt her love and trust stronger than ever. As the door closed behind my parents and the sound of the police car faded, the house fell silent again. I led Hazel to the sofa, pulling her into my arms. She rested her head on my shoulder, her breathing still shaky, but her silence spoke volumes. I knew she had endured too much, and I couldn't let her continue living in a cycle of being belittled and hurt. "I'm sorry, Hazel," I whispered, my voice hoarse with emotion. "I let this go too far." She looked up, shaking her head gently. "You protected me," she said, her voice soft but certain. "That's what matters most." Her words were like a ray of light, dispelling some of the darkness in my heart. But I knew that to truly protect Hazel, I had to do more. Sitting in the now emptier living room, I reflected on the past years. Since starting my job as an engineer, I had always sent money to my parents monthly, seeing it as my way of fulfilling my filial duty. I gave them a supplementary credit card, opened a joint account for their expenses, believing it was my responsibility as the eldest son. But they never acknowledged my efforts. They always defended Mason, their promising youngest son, despite his reckless debts and irresponsible lifestyle. Every time Mason lost money on risky investments, my parents turned to me as if my sacrifices were a given. I was tired of that cycle, and this morning when my mother doused Hazel with ice water, I knew I couldn't continue. I stood up, grabbed my laptop from the desk, and took action. First, I logged into my bank account and deactivated all the supplementary credit cards I had given my parents. I revoked their access to the joint account where they had withdrawn money without ever consulting me. Each click was a cut, severing the financial dependence I had allowed them to exploit for too long. I did it with a cold calmness, but inside I felt a strange sense of liberation. I no longer wanted to be the son who carried everything while they demanded more and belittled Hazel. The impact was immediate. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Mateo, what did you do to the credit cards?" she demanded, her voice thick with anger. "I went to the supermarket and couldn't pay for anything. Are you trying to let us starve?" I sat silently, listening to her berate me, but I didn't respond. I remembered all the times she criticized Hazel, the times she hinted I deserved someone else. I recalled Hazel's humiliated expression this morning, and I knew I couldn't soften. "Mom, I've done enough," I said, my voice low but resolute. "From now on, you and Dad are on your own." She shouted something, but I hung up, my hand trembling slightly. A week later, my father sent a long email full of complaints. He said they had no money for medicine, no money to pay for temporary housing. They had no choice but to turn to Mason, the son they always defended. But Mason, as I predicted, couldn't help. He was drowning in debt, living in a cramped, messy apartment in another city. When my parents moved in with him, their lives became a chaotic mess. Mason had no money, no sense of responsibility, and no interest in caring for them the way I had for years. For the first time, my parents experienced being abandoned by their precious son, a stark contrast to the support I had given them. I read my father's email, then saw more messages from my mother accusing me of being an ungrateful son. But I didn't reply. I set the phone down and looked at Hazel, who was sitting at the dining table grading her students' assignments. She looked up, giving me a gentle smile, and I saw that her eyes were lighter than before. I knew my decision wasn't easy, that it might brand me as the son who turned his back on his family. But I also knew that if I didn't set this boundary, Hazel's and my life would forever be dictated by unreasonable demands and the selfishness I had tolerated for too long. I walked over, sat beside Hazel, and placed my hand on hers. "Everything's going to be okay, right?" I asked softly. She nodded, squeezing my hand tighter. "With you here, I'm not afraid of anything," she said. And her smile was like sunlight breaking through the darkness in my heart. Our small house, though still bearing scars from the past days, was a home again. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I had made my choice. Hazel, our happiness, and a life no longer bound by blind obligations. In the first days after my parents left, the house seemed to breathe again. The living room was no longer cluttered with suitcases and boxes. The old sofa where my mother used to sit scrutinizing everything Hazel did was now ours again. A place where we could cuddle, watch a movie, or simply talk. The kitchen was no longer a mess of my mother's spice jars or piles of dishes she left behind. Hazel returned to her habit of keeping things tidy, placing small potted plants in the kitchen corner, and the scent of freshly baked cookies once again filled the air. I stood at the kitchen door watching her knead dough, a gentle smile on her lips, and my heart felt lighter than ever. This small, modest house was finally our home again. But for Hazel, recovery wasn't easy. In those early days, she was still haunted by what had happened. Some nights I woke to find her pressing her face into the pillow, her breathing shaky. "I dreamt of your mom," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She was there, yelling at me, pouring ice water on me." I held her tightly, feeling her body tremble in my arms. "I won't let anyone hurt you again, Hazel," I said, my voice hoarse with sorrow. "I promise." She nodded, resting against my chest, and I knew she was trying to heal from the invisible wounds left by the days of living with my parents. Gradually, Hazel began to reclaim herself. She returned to her teaching job, where she always found joy in her students' smiles. One afternoon, I picked her up from school and saw her standing in the playground, beaming as a little girl hugged her, proudly showing off a drawing. I watched from a distance, and I realized the light in Hazel was coming back. She started tending to the small habits that had been disrupted. Watering plants each morning, writing in her journal before bed, or softly humming while cooking. Every time I heard her sing, it felt like the house was healing little by little. I too felt a strange sense of liberation. Deciding to ask my parents to leave and cutting off financial support wasn't easy. There were moments when I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wrestling with guilt. I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if I was the ungrateful son they accused me of being. But then I'd look at Hazel, see her smile as she made coffee for me, or watch her diligently grade papers under the soft glow of the lamp, and I knew I'd done the right thing. I had chosen to protect the woman I love, to safeguard the happiness we'd built, instead of continuing to sacrifice for obligations that no longer held meaning. I started spending more time with Hazel. In the evenings, we sat in the living room sharing stories about our day. She told me about her students, how one boy made the class laugh by pretending to be a superhero. I shared updates about a new project at work, the blueprints I was finalizing. These small, mundane stories, once interrupted by my parents' presence, became the threads that bound us closer. We began talking about the future, about owning a home, about traveling, about the little family we wanted to build. Each time we spoke of it, Hazel's eyes lit up, and I felt an unshakable trust between us. Our love, after all the trials, grew deeper than ever. We had weathered a trial by fire. The suffocating days, the relentless criticism, and the moment I had to call the police to remove my parents. Hazel said to me one night as we sat by the window under the faint moonlight, "You know, I never realized how strong I could be until you were by my side." Her words warmed my heart. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're the strongest person I know," I said, and I knew that without her, I wouldn't have had the courage to set boundaries with my family. Our little house was now filled with peace. No more shouting, no more scrutinizing glares. Just Hazel's laughter when she teased me for burning the eggs. Just the moments we sat together, feeling safe and loved. I knew the scars from those days would never fully fade, but they had made us stronger. We had proven that our love could withstand any pressure, and that was the most precious thing. I stood at the kitchen door watching Hazel knead dough for cookies, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. catching her wavy brown hair. I smiled, realizing I hadn't lost my family as I once feared. I had found my true family, right here, in this small house, with the woman I love more than anything. And now, as I looked at Hazel, I knew it was time for us to turn the page to a new chapter, one called marriage. The decision to get married came naturally, as if both of us understood that after everything, nothing could stand in our way. One evening, sitting by the window with the faint moonlight illuminating Hazel's face, I took her hand and said, "Hazel, I want to marry you. Not to prove anything, but because I want to spend my life with you." She smiled, her eyes sparkling, and nodded. "I want that too, Mateo," she whispered. The wedding wasn't just a promise of love, it was a milestone affirming our independence, no longer dictated by family or blind obligations. This was our story, and we would write it our way. We dove into wedding preparations with excitement. Hazel wanted everything simple, reflecting who we are. We sat together at the dining table, designing invitations on cream-colored paper, handwriting each one for friends and colleagues. Hazel carefully chose flowers for the ceremony, white daisies and lavender, because she said they reminded her of the early days when we met at the community fundraiser. I took charge of the menu, selecting dishes we both loved: grilled meat, homemade bread, and the cookies Hazel often baked for me. Every detail, no matter how small, carried our touch, like a declaration that this day belonged to just the two of us. Our friends and colleagues became our biggest support. Hazel's family, her parents and younger sister, flew in from afar, bringing warm hugs and heartfelt blessings. My colleagues from the engineering firm helped build a small floral arch for the ceremony, while Hazel's fellow teachers decorated the venue with ribbons and paper lanterns. Seeing everyone come together, laughing and helping, made me feel we were building a new family. Not one bound by blood, but by people who truly valued and supported us. My family, as I expected, didn't show up. My parents, after I asked them to leave and cut off financial support, were still grappling with their own struggles. Mason, my irresponsible younger brother, cared even less. I heard they were living cramped in Mason's tiny, messy apartment, struggling with debts and internal conflicts. Part of me once hoped they'd change, realize their mistakes, and attend my big day. But as the wedding approached, I realized I no longer cared. I had chosen Hazel, chosen our happiness, and their absence didn't hurt me like it once would have. The wedding day arrived with clear Denver skies and gentle sunlight filtering through the oak trees. The ceremony took place in a small suburban hall we rented. It wasn't lavish or extravagant, but the air was filled with laughter and warmth. When Hazel walked in, wearing a simple white wedding dress, my heart stopped. She was breathtaking, not because of the dress, but because of the trust and love shining in her eyes. I stood there in my gray suit, feeling like the world had narrowed to just her. As she approached and took my hand, her smile, the one that had pulled me through the darkest days, lit up everything. The ceremony unfolded in moments of sincerity. Friends and colleagues gave speeches, sharing stories of our journey. One of Hazel's fellow teachers recounted the day we met at the fundraiser when I clumsily struck up a conversation and spilled my orange juice. The room erupted in laughter, and Hazel squeezed my hand, whispering, "I knew you were special back then." A colleague from my firm spoke of my determination, not just at work, but in how I protected Hazel. Their words were a reminder of how far we'd come to reach this moment. The most perfect moment came when we exchanged rings. I held the small silver ring engraved with our names and slipped it onto Hazel's finger. Her hand trembled slightly, her eyes brimming with tears, and I felt my own eyes sting. "Hazel, I promise to always be by your side no matter what," I said, my voice catching. She smiled, sliding the ring onto my finger, and whispered, "I promise too, Mateo. Forever." As we embraced, the room erupted in applause, but all I heard was Hazel's heartbeat syncing with mine. Tears rolled down our cheeks, not just from joy, but because we knew we'd overcome immense challenges to get here. That wedding was more than a ceremony. It was proof that true love could withstand family pressures, relentless criticism, and every obstacle. As I held Hazel's hand walking out of the hall into the afternoon sunlight, I knew we hadn't just found each other. We had built a family, a home, and a future nothing could break. Life after the wedding flowed like a gentle melody. Our small rented house, though still bearing invisible scars from the stormy days, was now filled with laughter. Each morning I woke up next to Hazel, hearing her softly hum in the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. We ate breakfast together, sharing small stories, from the antics of Hazel's students that made her laugh to the technical drawings I was finalizing at work. Gone were my mother's criticisms of Hazel's cooking. Gone were my father's disappointed looks. It was just us, free to live authentically as ourselves. Our careers stabilized. I was assigned a major project at work, a new bridge on the outskirts of Denver, and I poured my heart into every detail, much like I was building a future with Hazel. She rediscovered her joy in teaching, dedicating time to crafting new lesson plans and organizing activities for her students. We started making long-term plans, saving for a house of our own, where we could paint the walls in Hazel's favorite colors, plant a small vegetable garden, and prepare for a future family. Each time we talked about it, Hazel would take my hand, her eyes sparkling, and I felt like the world was opening up before us. Meanwhile, I heard bits and pieces about my parents and Mason. They were still struggling, cramped in Mason's tiny apartment in another city. Debts piled up, and internal conflicts grew. Mason, the son my parents once pinned their hopes on, couldn't support or care for them as they had imagined. I heard my mother had called Mason begging for help, but he only offered empty promises before diving back into his failed investment schemes. My father, who always quietly but staunchly supported my mother, was starting to face the bitter truth. Mason wasn't someone they could rely on. Their misguided choice, indulging Mason while taking me for granted, had become a harsh lesson. There were moments when I felt a pang thinking about my parents. Images of my mother packing her things, my father's disappointed look as they left my house, occasionally flickered in my mind. I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if there was something else I could have done to avoid this outcome. But then I'd look at Hazel, see her smile as she watered her plants, see the trust in her eyes when she held my hand. And I knew I couldn't return to the old cycle of indulgence. Going back would mean letting Hazel be hurt again, letting myself be dragged down by unreasonable demands. For the first time, I lived true to my values, protecting the small but sacred happiness I shared with Hazel. I realized something profound. Family isn't always a safe haven. Sometimes the people closest to us cause the deepest pain. Daring to set boundaries, daring to say no, isn't unfilial. It's how we love ourselves and those we cherish. Filial piety doesn't mean unconditional sacrifice, especially when that sacrifice fuels selfishness and injustice. Hazel and I proved that true happiness comes from choosing the right partner, building a home based on respect, equality, and love. We didn't just survive the storm. We emerged stronger, more connected, and ready for any challenges ahead. One late afternoon, Hazel and I cleaned the small kitchen together. She washed dishes while I wiped the table, our laughter ringing out as she teased me for spilling water on the floor. "If you're this clumsy, what will our kids be like?" she said, her eyes twinkling. I laughed, pulling her into my arms, feeling her warmth. The golden light of the setting sun streamed through the window, illuminating our little kitchen like a symbol of a new beginning. I smiled, realizing I hadn't lost my family as I once feared. I had found my true home, right here with Hazel in this small house, where our love was everything.